Good morning, everybody. I'm Sherry Seligson, and we are going to do day 4 of some fun activities that we can do while we are staying at home and trying to keep our time productive and fun. And so before we go into what we're going to do today, I want to talk about some things from yesterday. Yesterday we had an egg that we had removed the shell from. And how did we do that? We soaked it overnight in vinegar. And so I was wanting to then take that egg with the membrane, that semi-permeable membrane, and put it in a container of Karo syrup, which is a super thick sugary syrup. Of course, I had no Karo syrup, and we're trying to do things that we have around the house, and I didn't want to go to the store just for that. So I had some pancake syrup that I put it in. And so it's been soaking overnight in the pancake syrup. You can see the egg right here. I'm going to put it in this container of water just to rinse it off a little bit. And just get some of that sticky syrup off. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you guys have been enjoying this as we've been going this week. I've got some fun things we're going to do tomorrow. I'll show you in a minute, and then we'll talk about what we can do for next week too. This looks like this is for the long haul, and I don't know if I can keep up every day, but as long as I can, I'm going to. All right, so what I have right now is an egg that has been soaking in the syrup overnight, and you can see it's actually similar in size to what it was before. I can feel it. It's a little squishier than it was, which means some of the water that was inside the membrane moved out because the concentration of stuff dissolved in the syrup, there's more stuff in there than there is stuff dissolved inside the egg. And so the water wants to go to the greater concentration of solutes, it's called, the stuff that's dissolved. And so it moved out of the egg through the membrane and into that thicker material to dilute it, basically. And so this thing is much smaller now. See if I can turn, this is the best way to get that side-to-side angle. The best way to do it is actually to use measuring tape and to measure all the way around to see that. Or you can take a string and wrap around it and hold it up to a ruler, and then that will help you to determine its circumference and to see if it's a difference from initially. And then what we can do now is we can actually go back and forth. I want to take this and put it in some water, and I'm going to just put a dot of food coloring in my water so that we can see it better. So this is just a container of water, and I'm going to put this in. Now, coffee mugs work really great for this. I mentioned that before. And you got to use an uncooked egg. And so I'm going to put blue, no, I think I'll put, yeah, I'm going to put blue food coloring. I think that will work out best. And I'm just going to put 2 drops because I don't want to put too many of the chemicals that are in here in that water. I still want my water solution to have less dissolved materials than the materials that are inside my egg. Let me just use this gently, this knife, because I don't want to pop my egg, and stir it around. Okay, so you can see now I've got my egg in my water, and we'll check back tomorrow to see what happens to our egg. All right, so let's put that aside. And now we're going to talk and kind of wrap up what we've been talking about, kind of the theme of botany that we've been doing all of our discussion on. We've hit on some properties of water, even suggested some things you can do that involve geography and history, and even composition. If you checked in the comments of some of these videos, I'm including links to other things you can do. I think it'd be fun to do a composition or a writing project or a story project where a student writes a story about a water molecule and how it travels through the water cycle from evaporation to condensation to precipitation, and maybe the adventures that little water molecule has as it goes around that cycle. They can do illustrations on that, make a little book, really something fun to do. But we're going to wrap up by talking about some other properties of plants. We talked about roots and how roots behave to a plant. We talked about the stems of a plant. And now I want to talk about the flowers and the fruit. That's how a plant reproduces. It produces flowers. Some plants actually don't produce flowers, but they produce cones. Like a pine tree will produce pine cones. And I have different kinds of flowers here. Let me move this guy out of the way. Different kinds of flowers here. I'm going to break apart some of these so we can see what's going on. Some of the best flowers to use for an example would be a lily, because lilies tend to have larger components and all of the major components of a flower. There's 4 basic components to a flower, and you'll have the I'm going to use this one as an example. See these little green sections? These are called the sepals, S-E-P-A-L, and they are what contain the flower when it's in a bud form. All right, so the sepals will enclose the petals of the flower, and when the flower is ready to finally open up, you can see those remnant sepals. And so there are plants. Here's a rose. You can see the sepals of the rose. All right, the group of sepals is called the calyx. And then the next most internal segment would be the petals. And just as the example here, you can see various colors and types of flower petals. Some flower petals are long and skinny, like this purple one right here. Some are big, like the rose. Some come in multiples of specific numbers. I'm going to take this little mini lily to do the next couple sections, because we have the sepals, we have the petals. And I'm going to pull the petals off of this one, and I want to show you the next segment of flowers. These are the reproductive organs of the flower. And so you have the stamens, which are these. Let me get closer so you guys can see. The stamens have these little things on top of them which contain the pollen. All right, the pollen containing portion. And the pollen, actually that's the male portion of the flower, and the pollen will travel from flower to flower and will then fertilize the eggs. So I'm going to pull off the stamens of this one. I've got one right there. You can see it. Okay, so let me pull the rest of them off. There's actually 6 stamens on this flower. So that's the third portion. Okay, and then what's left, notice there's not any pollen on top of this. That's because that's the central, inmost part of the flower, and that's the female portion of the flower. This is the pistil, and so the pollen will land on the top of the pistil right here and burrow its way down into the innermost part where the egg cells are. And when the egg cells get fertilized, move these leaves, you can see right inside here, you can see it kind of slightly swells a little bit right there. That area will start to grow, and that's where the seeds are produced, okay? And so I want to get to that because that's where we'll talk about fruit. Now, there are various ways that the pollen can travel to to pollinate the flowers. It can go by the wind. Some pollen travels by the wind. Some species are really depending on the wind in order to get pollinated. Others depend on animals, such as butterflies and bees and even bears and other mammals that will come in and use the nectar. They produce a sweet nectar, so the animals will come and get that nectar, and in the process they get covered with it. So you could do a whole study on pollinating. One thing I love to do is to get a cherry tomato plant and bring it indoors, grow it from inside. Cherry tomatoes are very small. They take a shorter amount of time to actually become ripe. They produce bright yellow flowers, really tiny ones, and you can bring that inside, but because they're pollinated by bees for the most part, bees can't get to those flowers that are in your house. So you can take some pipe cleaners and make your own little bee, and once the flowers have emerged, you see the flowers, you can be the bee and you can go from flower to flower to flower and watch that the pollen gets on the little fibers of your pipe cleaner bee, and you can pollinate your own flowers and then watch as the fruit starts to develop. Just all you need is a sunny window, a pot to contain the plant, and then just a cherry tomato plant. Really fun way to extend this study, and then you've got some great fruit at the end of it. Yes, indeed. I have some examples of fruit here. Some fruits are not what you would expect them to be called as fruits. I just wanted to show you really quickly, this flower right here has not opened up yet, and it's completely surrounded by its sepals. You see, let me get closer. You see that right there? That's a flower that's going to come out soon. Okay, so we've come up. I think I'm getting called by spam. I should turn that off there. Okay, so we have 4 major parts of the flower, from the outermost to the innermost. We had the sepals, we had the petals, then we had the male portions, and then we had the female portion. And so there's 4 parts that you could actually print out a drawing, an illustration. There's lots of printables you can find online and have your kids label those. Tomorrow, let me grab this real quick. We're gonna do some fun stuff, making some things that you can do to put the information you're learning together. We're gonna make little booklets, And so we've got different colored papers. You're gonna make tab booklets. We're gonna do a lot of these together. This is one I love to do. This is one of a biography. And so we're gonna make all kinds of those tomorrow. So that's a 4-part one that you could include the 4 major parts of the flower. And so all the things that we've been learning, hopefully you can take that and move it to the further study or activities that your kids can do after we've gone over it. So once the flower's pollinated, the whole point of this is to make seeds. So the seeds can disperse and the plants can then reproduce and make other plants. And so they produce those seeds in a fruit. Here's one example of a fruit, and you may say, no, it's not, it's a vegetable. Technically, we have different categories in biology than we do in nutrition. So anything that's got seeds in it would be considered a fruit. So this bell pepper is a fruit. This cucumber is a fruit. Of course, my strawberries are a fruit, and I have no other fruits here. But I want you to see, if you look closely, the end of this bell pepper is there's a little kind of black, what looks like a fiber sticking out right at the end. And if you have a bell pepper at home, you might see that. That is the actual pistil of the flower when it was in the flower. And so that pistil, the pollen grains went into the pistil, fertilized the eggs, and then the eggs grew and developed this fruit. And we cut it inside, you will see, let me cut it down, right down the middle here. I actually want to cut it like this too. There we go. Of course, you can see there's lots of seeds here, and that's the whole purpose, is that the seeds will get dispersed. But I cut right where that little pointy part is. Can you see that little part sticking up? That's where the flower was. Okay, that's where that female portion of the flower was, the pistil, where the pollen grains went in, and then all of this grew afterwards. And this is the original stem that the flower was on. Okay, so it's all connected. It's all part. It's part of that growing. In fact, I have, let's see if I can find it, strawberries. Now, strawberries grow off the plant like this. The original flower was here. These were the sepals. They still are the sepals. All right, and in fact, in this particular one, there's what's the remnant of a petal. You see that little grayish colored one? The strawberry flowers are white. This one's kind of old now because the petals have fallen off. But when you look inside of the petals, if you look really, really closely, you can see multiple stamens here. All right, so there was a flower right here with the stamens inside, and just inside the stamens would be the female part of the flower, and that's where this fruit grows. There's actually multiple female parts here. This is an aggregate fruit, meaning there was lots and lots and lots of female parts, and all of those got fertilized to produce this whole strawberry. So this is one kind of fruit. This is another kind of fruit, but they're all fruits because their job is to disperse the seeds of the plant. And you can see some of the remnant flower parts on these fruits. Of course, as you do this, wash them, cut them up, eat them. They're great. It's a great edible way to explore how plants produce food for us. And we're going to wrap that part up tomorrow as well. But I also wanted to show you some other plant parts that you might not be familiar with what they are. So, you know, this is broccoli, right? But the little balls on top, those are little tiny flowers. If you were to allow this to grow further and further, you'd get tiny little flowers. So we're eating the flower part of the broccoli. I'm using what I have, guys. This is a piece of celery. That's the stem of a plant, okay? This is a leaf of spinach, right? You can see the venation. Can you tell? You guys remember what the kind of venation that is? That's pinnate venation, like pin feathers, like a feather. Okay, that's a pinnate venation of this leaf that is edible, okay? And then I have some carrots. Carrots are roots. Those are edible too. And then this is a surprising one. I did a short little video post a couple weeks ago about this. Onions, we think are roots, but they're not. This is a type of stem, believe it or not. And the roots of the onion are these tiny little fibers that you see sticking down here. Okay, so the roots are here. This is called a modified stem, but it's a type of stem with layers and layers. And then the green part grows up out of the ground, which is the photosynthesizing part. So the leaves and the stem of the onion are the part that stick up out of the ground. So this is a stem, but we still eat it. And we call it a vegetable nutritionally, but it is a stem that we're eating biologically, okay? So kind of fun stuff to talk about when we're talking about plants, wrapping this up. I want to talk a little bit more about tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to wrap up everything. I want to get a little hamburger. I'm going to show you. I'm not sure if I'm going to go get a hamburger. I may have to have an illustration of a hamburger, but we're going to talk about how we can tie all of everything that we eat back to solar energy and how important that is for photosynthesis. And then again, like I said earlier, we're going to do a lot of little booklets that we can take the information that we're learning, make a little book. Some of these things fold. We're going to do a bunch of these, and that way you guys have some place you can put the stuff that you're learning into to keep and to look back on. And then we may take another nature walk tomorrow and just go outside. I'm hoping to maybe put together some kind of scavenger hunt or a tic-tac-toe or something that we do versus for the outside. When you spot something, then you can mark it in your game. And so it could be a fun outdoor game where you're exploring, but your kids have to know what they're looking for. And so we'll put something like that together for tomorrow. But thank you guys for joining me. We've had so much fun this week. I really appreciate the feedback I'm getting and the comments. If you have any questions, put them in the comments too. Let me know if this time is working well for you, where you're located. I'm trying to figure out how many time zones this is spanning so I can hit a spot that works pretty well for everybody. Of course, you can watch it recorded, which is fine too. And again, thanks for the comments. Hope to see you guys this time again tomorrow, 11 o'clock tomorrow. And thank you for joining me.